Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Johnson in for Nicole Wallace. President-elect Joe Biden today delivering a clear, competent, reasonable message of his COVID approach. Transparency, honesty, and leading with science. And how his team will tackle Trump's sluggish and incompetent COVID approach and vaccination rollout. Asking for patience from Americans and promising again to vaccinate 100 million Americans in his first 100 days, about 9 times today's total. After meeting today with his transition advisors, Biden says no goal is too big with the nation's health at stake. He says his team will get it done by increasing supply as fast as possible, encouraging states to vaccinate as many people as possible, and doses become more available, instructing FEMA to set up 100 federally supported vaccination centers. In Biden's words, he's going to manage the hell out of this virus. Positivity and calls for unity from the president-elect today for a nation suffering great loss. More than 390,000 to the coronavirus so far, nearly 4,000 of them just yesterday, and more than 23,000 just this week. And now this grim prediction from the CDC for Biden's first few weeks. Nearly 90,000 more Americans could die from COVID by the first week of February. Biden's big moment, now just 5 days away, when he'll inherit a nation broken and unrecognizable, almost a dystopian wasteland of terrorism and viruses, where his own inauguration rehearsal has been postponed because of domestic security threats. And even the immediate future of what should be a good thing, a majority in the Senate, will be hampered by the past as they juggle an impeachment trial and finally confirming Biden's cabinet delayed because Trump couldn't accept that he lost. This is where we start our hour with NBC News' Ali Vitale live in Wilmington, Delaware. Also with us, MSNBC contributor Mara Gay, a member of the editorial board at the New York Times, and MSNBC medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel, who was a White House health policy director in the Obama administration. This is probably one of the better speeches I've seen Joe Biden give. Ali, I'll start with you. What was the goal? What was sort of the chatter behind the scenes with the Biden team? Because he came out today swinging. He called people who wouldn't mask up stupid. He said he was going to manage the hell out of this virus. He was frustrated. He was passionate. He was calm. What tone were they trying to strike?
All of those. I think that we saw it starting last night where he struck this tone of optimism, but also didn't mince any words around the harrowing stakes here that he was inheriting just 5 days from now. And today we heard the same thing. Your takeaway was that he was going to manage the heck out of this. I think my takeaway was that the word of the day here is more. More vaccinations, more ways to get vaccinated, and more coordination with states and the federal government. We have seen a real absence of federal leadership here, and Biden transition officials, as well as Biden himself, have worked really hard over the course of these last few weeks to make the point that that role of federal government work is not going to be unfilled any longer. And so to that end, what we saw last night was the initial layout of that $1.9 trillion plan that he's going to push for in the early weeks and months of his administration. But today he really drilled down on the roughly $416 billion that they're asking for in relation to the vaccine distribution. You're right that he minced no words about how dismal the vaccination response has been so far. That's true, especially when you look at the goals that they laid out and then how far short of them they have fallen over the course of the last few weeks. But there's a few things that Biden's going to be doing differently that really flip the strategy around, including the piece where he's going to be less rigid around who can get the vaccine right now. They're going to be releasing more of the vaccine that's available, holding back some of it just in case it lags in terms of production levels, but mostly getting it out there to states and saying that they want less rigidity around who can get this vaccination, people 65 and over, as well as frontline workers. But Biden said that while initially those guidelines were based in science, they've been too rigid to this point. He also made clear that he wasn't going to shy away from using the Defense Production Act. That's something that we hadn't seen from this administration, and that Biden was clear he was going to push for both on the vaccine front itself, but then also in terms of the things that you need to store the vaccine and actually get it out to people. They set this really lofty goal of 100 million vaccinations, so 50 million people vaccinated in the course of 100 days. That's going to be really crucial for them to hit. At the same time, though, you heard him reminding people that just because they're rolling out the vaccine doesn't mean that they have to stop doing all of the things that we know so well: social distancing, wearing masks, and he's going to ask Americans to wear masks for the first 100 days of his administration as well.
So, Ollie, I want to follow up on this. So, one of the big things that's also just been announced is that the incoming Biden administration now has access to Tiberius, which sounds like some sort of cool super science program. What is this Tiberius software, and why is it so important for them to already have access to this now, given what Biden just said in his speech?
Because this is one of the key ways that they get to roll out the vaccine. They get to see the ways that they have, who has what, and that's one of the key things that he mentioned in this speech, is they're going to be able to have a way for states to know who has X amount of doses of this vaccine. The fact that they got access to Tiberius, which you're right, it sounds like a very antiquated Byzantine way of talking about a software program, but the fact that they got access to it late leaves them behind the eight ball. These were the kinds of concerns that we were hearing from Biden transition sources over the course of this transition, that they weren't getting the information as early as they needed it. And that's why we saw them sort of creating these plans to roll out the vaccine on a parallel track, really, to what Operation Warp Speed was already doing. So we're seeing now from Biden that they're projecting optimism, but at the same time, it's very clear that they are behind where they wanted to be at this point.
Dr. Patel, one of the more interesting parts of what I, again, thought was a really good speech by incoming President Joe Biden was the idea of fighting against disinformation, making sure that the disinformation that's already online is sort of countered by national education programs. I want you to pay attention to this tweet right here from Congressman Espillat. This congressman had actually taken both doses of the vaccine, and yet still contracted coronavirus, which is something that certain segments of the online world are using to say, hey, the vaccines don't work, they don't work. How do you think Joe Biden's message is going to fight through that kind of disinformation? And can you explain to a little bit to the audience how it is that somebody could have taken both doses of the vaccine and yet still contracted coronavirus?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. Good to be with you, and couldn't agree with you more that I think what we're going to see is just a communication plan. We never had one. We never had a national strategy. We never really had a federal response whatsoever. And part of that is going to be a communication plan that involves what's true and what's false about the vaccine. And to your point, the congressman had both doses, but all of us, including myself, know that full immunity occurs anywhere from at least 1 to 2 weeks after that second dose. There has been some limited data to show that there is the beginning of immunity after that first dose, but to really get the full 95% efficacy, which we know has been transmitted and reported in clinical trial data, we do need that second dose and time for your immune system to respond. Even more important, I think, Jason, is to convey that just getting the vaccine, both doses, and even waiting doesn't necessarily prevent your body from contracting the coronavirus. What it does do, and is highly effective at, is decreasing and taking down your risk of dying or getting disease from the coronavirus. So I think that's why you see people like me. I'm still wearing my full PPE. I'm doing everything possible until we have even better data, Jason, about what we can expect that this virus, what the vaccines can do to defeat the virus once we get to herd immunity, or at least a greater percentage of the population. And I'll tell you, I know the president-elect is dealing with the fact that he's watching the CDC reports just like we are about these mutations and the mutant variation from the UK, and the CDC projecting that that could be the dominant strain. So you bet he wants clear communication. And I think he also said something that I want to highlight. That also means the bad aspects of this. He's not going to sugarcoat it. He's not going to hide it. We need to have adults who tell us what is happening. You and I have been talking about the deaths, the sickness. Mara's been talking about her story with kind of battling kind of chronic COVID. We need someone to just keep it real. And I couldn't have heard more of that. I really appreciate that I heard all of that in the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Patel, the public really needs to understand this, especially with the congressman. It's taking this vaccine, it's like the flu shot. Just because you take the flu shot doesn't mean that you can run naked through the street and lick flagpoles, right? You could still catch the flu. It just lessens your chances. And people need to understand that the vaccine takes a while to work. With that idea, Mara, I want you to listen to some sound from Dr. Fauci. You know, one of the things that President-elect Biden was talking about is that we're going to have public, private, state, and federal partnerships. I want to hear what your thoughts are on what Dr. Fauci said about this on the other side.
You don't want the federal government to take all the responsibility of doing this. You don't want the states to be left on their own. You've got to have a good degree of interaction. And I think that's what we're going to see more of, where states will have both help with regard to resources, but also more of a general coordinated plan about how to do this.
Mara, first off, we have some states that are red, some states that are blue, some states that are purple, and some states that are run by competent people. How likely do you think it is that we're going to see the kind of federal-state relationship and coordination that Dr. Fauci is talking about?
I think we're going to have a much greater chance under President Joe Biden. And my hope is that that's where their focus is. Look, it's a big country and it's a complicated country with a far from unified government, right? You have all the states all have their own individual government. Some of those states and even cities within those states are going to be highly effective at delivering this vaccine to their people. Others will need state or, in many cases, federal help to do so. And I think that the goal is to be nimble. And so where you have cities and localities and states that are going to be effective at that, let them do their job, get out of the way, get them the vaccines, get out of the way. Make sure that the policy is to get them in as many arms as possible, as quickly as possible, and as safely as possible. And then where you have other places in the United States that maybe don't have that kind of health infrastructure, public health infrastructure, they are going to need more federal help. So an example of this would be, here in New York City, we have, not to brag, but truly we do have an exceptionally well-regarded public health department. In 1947, it inoculated 1 million residents against smallpox in under a month. So this is an infrastructure that can actually deliver vaccines very quickly. I'm putting them on the line here. They should be going faster than they are, but still, the infrastructure is vast here. There are going to be a lot of places in the United States, especially in rural areas, where that's just not the case. So the goal is to be nimble and to make sure that the politics doesn't play a role, but that the public health officials, local, state, federal, are able to do their job with the resources they need.
This might be the only time I say this. We might hope that every place is like New York when it comes to delivering this virus, at least from the 1940s. NBC's Ali Vitali, Mara Gay, and Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you so much for starting us off. We all heard those frightening chants from the rioters and the terrorists to hang Mike Pence. Now the Washington Post is reporting they got extremely close to him when they attacked the Capitol. Quote, about 1 minute after Pence was hustled out of the chamber, a group charged up the stairs to a second-floor landing in the Senate, chasing a Capitol police officer who drew them away from the Senate. Pence and his family had just ducked into a hideaway less than 100 feet from the landing, according to 3 people familiar with his whereabouts who spoke on condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the situation. If the pro-Trump mob had arrived just seconds earlier, the attackers would have been in eyesight of the vice president as he was rushed across a reception hall into the office, unquote. And now, as more details emerge over what took place that day, officials must also guard against ongoing threats going forward. FBI Director Christopher Wray warning of, quote, concerning online chatter, unquote, about potential risks surrounding Vice President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration, which will take place 5 days from today. The city of Washington, D.C. now looks like it's preparing for war. I can tell you the entire city is shut down. Residents are frightened. There are police and soldiers everywhere. Extraordinary security precautions, including deploying over 20,000 National Guard troops, which officials point out is roughly 3 times the total number of Americans deployed in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and Syria. Joining us now in our city under siege is Jake Sherman, founder of Punchbowl News, as well as an MSNBC contributor. Also, Matt Zapotowski, Washington Post national security reporter, and Kurt Bardella, who is an advisor to the Republicans on the House Oversight Committee, now a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. Kurt, I want to start with you. You had just a fantastic viral moment yesterday when you talked about the security issues and what was going on in the House after this attack. I want you to listen to this sound from Speaker Nancy Pelosi as she talks about sort of the imagery and the symbolism behind all these precautions with the inauguration. I'm going to get your thoughts when we come back.
For a long time now, weeks, it has been determined that we would have a very small inauguration because of COVID. Most disappointing because obviously we're excited about nominating a new president of the United States, but not at the risk of people's health and well-being and indeed their lives. So this is always going to be small. Now, with the insurrection of last week, it is necessitated by security to have more security, but it hasn't changed the nature of the swearing in. I think it's important for people to know that. This is not a concession to the terrorist. It is a recognition of the danger of COVID.
You know, Kurt, after 9/11, there was a sort of meme that always popped up. Well, if we don't do this, then the terrorists have won. If we don't get burgers, the terrorists have won. If we don't play baseball, the terrorists have won. What do you think of Nancy Pelosi's explanation here? Hey, look, the terrorists have not won. We were going to have a small inauguration anyway. Do you think that message goes through? And what does she have to put out there to make sure that the people who did attack our country are not emboldened to think that they have gotten some sort of concession out of how this usual ceremony would come across?
Well, you know, Jason, I think that this is such a delicate balance, right? You have to look at, obviously, the security of the president-elect and of all the people who are going to be there. You have to look at, obviously, the impact of COVID-19. As the speaker said, this was always going to be a different inauguration because of that. We're not going to have tens of thousands of people on the mall watching the peaceful transition of power. That was never going to happen. But I think that we would all be fooling ourselves if we didn't acknowledge that things are different this year, this time, because of the insurrection that we saw just the other week. The fact that even rehearsing for inauguration has been disrupted and having to change. The fact that we even have to have the conversation about having armed National Guard troops be here, have that presence in D.C. to ward off potential instigators and protesters and violence and riots. This is the United States of America. The entire point of our country is that we have the peaceful transition of power, that we shouldn't have to worry about changing governments with under siege and violence hanging over us. And this is why I keep going back to the line that the Republicans who say we need to unite, we need to move forward, we need to come together, I'm sorry, but neither you nor I are going to be able to unite with people who are racist, who are white nationalists, who want to hang our elected officials, who want to kidnap them, who want to hold them hostage and execute them. There is no uniting with them. Imagine what Republicans would have said if after 9/11 we had gone out there and said, well, we need to unite. We need to move on. We need to not hold people accountable. What happened last week was more devastating than 9/11 because it happened from within and was fueled by our own leadership. And one of the political parties in America is still standing with those people instead of standing for democracy.
Tell you all, Kurt brings such fire, he literally lit candles in the background of his set there. Matt, this is something that I think is probably one of the most engrossing things that we've seen since this terror attack. Finding out day by day how close this country came to assassinations of multiple leaders. We've got the Washington Post story that Mike Pence was 100 feet away from possibly getting attacked by a mob. We now have additional information about tours that are happening. What's it been like just getting this kind of reporting out of the Capitol Hill Police and the White House right now? And what kinds of things do you think we're going to hear about over the next couple of days as more information comes forward?
I think there have been two big reporting targets, right? One is to getting to the bottom of what I think everyone would agree now was an unmitigated disaster in terms of defending the Capitol. What did the FBI know and when? What did the Capitol Police know and when? Today, the inspectors general of several agencies, including the Justice Department, announced they're going to investigate, see sort of what intelligence and security failures precipitated, the events of January 6th. And then this is all very relevant in the next week. You have another big high-profile event with Joe Biden's inauguration, and police, Capitol Police, FBI, Secret Service have to prove that they can defend that sort of thing. So the other line of reporting is, what are they doing different this time? How are they responding to threats this time? Certainly the FBI is going out and arresting people that are responsible for January 6th. And that will sort of take them off the board in terms of the inauguration. They're monitoring all sorts of online chatter, but they're under a lot of pressure to do a lot better than they did last year.
So, Jake, speaking of pressure to do better, right? We have reporting out of the New York Times that Mike Pence has, I guess, turned over a new leaf. He's spoken to, incoming Vice President Kamala Harris. He's made efforts to communicate with her, possibly have dinner with her husband. Do you think this is Mike Pence recognizing, look, the jig is up, I finally have to do things better? Or is he just tired? I mean, I suspect that having people chant, hang Mike Pence, might make you realize that you want to get out of this job as soon as possible.
Well, I would imagine that he no longer worries about what Donald Trump thinks of him, frankly. I don't think that they have, from all reporting, from my indications, they don't have much of a relationship anymore. And this is the kind of thing that he could never do if he was still on speaking terms, probably, with the president of the United States. Remember, Mike Pence and Joe Biden spoke when Pence took over, had at least what they described as a working relationship, a fine relationship. They got along, and Joe Biden helped him take the reins of being vice president. I just want to follow up on what Matt said. He's absolutely correct about just the physical security of the Capitol and the challenge, and his reporting has been so crucial on this, the challenge that the Park Police and the Secret Service and the Capitol Police and the FBI have. I'm in the Capitol right now, and I can tell you, I don't underestimate people who want to do bad things, but I could tell you that it is very difficult to get into this building right now, and you can't walk. I mean, the image you're seeing here is, I believe, that 2nd or 3rd Street that runs across the mall about 2 or 3 blocks from the Capitol. I have to enter the Capitol every day by going 3 or 4 blocks out of the way, going through at least 3 or 4 checkpoints. I park in a garage in the Capitol. It is nearly impossible. It takes me about 30 minutes to get into the garage. I just have a very hard time believing that anybody is getting anywhere close to this complex right now. It's a complete fortress that is no fun to get anywhere near.
And that's not just sort of difficult for the inauguration process, but I keep telling people, you've got 700,000 people who live in Washington, D.C. They are essentially living in a city under siege because of last week's terror attack. One of the things that we've also sort of found out as we find more information out about this attack is, again, the calls are coming from inside the House. NBC has a story right now talking about the fact that you have members of Congress who are legitimately concerned that they might be attacked by staffers or other Congress members on the Republican side. You know, Matt, I want your thoughts on this because, you know, when you have members of Congress who say, hey, I want to bring in my guns, I don't care what anybody else says. When you have members of Congress who may or may not have brought some of these terrorists into the building in advance, when you have members of Congress who have said, you know, basically kill the rabbit, blah, 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 they want this country burned to the ground, how realistic is it to think that anybody can go back to work with someone who they think is going to shoot them?
I mean, we'll see, right? The relationship in Congress, I cover the Justice Department, so maybe I'm not the best person to speak to this, but the relationship in Congress between Democrats and Republicans has been broken for a long time, and it seems like it's especially broken now when you have Democratic lawmakers saying that they sort of fear their own colleagues. They fear that their own colleagues or their colleagues' staffers might have participated in some sort of reconnaissance before the events of January 6th. Now, I think the evidence on that is still pretty limited, right? It's a far cry from someone doing a congressional tour to doing reconnaissance. That's one thing maybe that law enforcement will go down the road of exploring. But look, the effects of this are going to stick with us beyond just January 20th, too, right? We'll see what security measures stay in place, especially for the Capitol, after January. We'll see what additional security measures other government buildings might get after January 20th. You know, this event, I think, is raising a lot of, you know, it's pointing out how badly the system can fail. And so maybe we need to change some of the system.
And the result being that we still have more limited access to our leaders, which is always a shame. Jake Sherman, Matt Zapotosky, and Kurt Bardella, thank you all so very much for joining us today.